Ancient Rome, around 90 AD. It's a time of legendary heroes, notorious emperors, and gigantic spectacles.
Chariot racing was by far the most popular sport in ancient Rome,
as passed down by many ancient sources. They also tell of the rise of a young slave who became a superstar.
The charioteer's name is inscribed. Scorpus, who rose up from slavery and achieved immortality.
Scorpus nurtures the dream of many slaves.
One of the distinctive features of slavery in Rome is that a slave had a possibility of freedom.
A career as charioteer could provide the means to become a free man.
Go to Rome and win a race for me. Do it for me, Scorpus, my boy.
Scorpus becomes Rome's darling. A life in the fast lane that fascinates even today.
This is a completely different sensation.
Inside the boiling cauldron of the Circus Maximus,
the races would have been very violent.
their traces can still be found.
This is the crucial point where the race is won or lost.
The Roman entertainment business reveals its astonishing details, as well as its dark side.
You could pay someone to put a curse on the rival team.
A glimpse behind the scenes
Corpus.
of the ancient equivalent of Formula One. Ancient Rome, around 90 AD, a metropolis with nearly 1 million inhabitants. Back then, there's nothing like it throughout Europe. An overwhelming experience for the young charioteer.
People coming to Rome from the countryside would be stunned to see the baths, the entertainment places, the many-storied buildings in which people lived. Just the noise and the different languages. It was really quite an amazing city to live in.
But there are also unpleasant sides to the empire's capital.
When we think of Rome, we tend to think of the great classical buildings with their clean white marble, but the reality would have been much grubbier. There were very few toilets, for example, so the city must have smelt. There are records of people going to the loo behind imperial statues, so the reality was far grubbier and messier.
Among all the impressive sights of this megacity, there is one place that takes away the breath of every first-time visitor. The Circus Maximus. From the stands, up to 150,000 spectators cheer on their heroes. It's the ultimate stage for champions, and the goal for those who strive to become one. Like Scorpus.
Charioteering was the most popular spectacle in Rome. And the emperors exported the charioteering to other cities, Roman cities in the empire. Everywhere we found circuses where the races were held.
Chariot racing was the export hit of Rome's entertainment business, and traces of its impact can still be found in many parts of the empire. For instance, in Carthage, in today's Tunisia. Archaeologist Ralph Bockmann from the German Archaeological Institute and his team have unearthed parts of the ancient circus.
We're in the Circus of Carthage, the biggest circus outside of Rome. We're standing on the arena floor itself. So you have to imagine that over this floor, the horses were running at a high speed. In the back, you have the spectators, 70, 80,000 people lining all the circus over hundreds of meters, booing, cheering for their chariot. This is the end of the spina itself, this semicircle, and in front of it you see the meta. It's the turning point for the chariots. You have to imagine 3 big cones standing on there so that the charioteers can see them from far away, then they know where they have to do this crucial turn. It's a 180-degree turn. The closer you get to the spina, the more dangerous it gets, right? If your wheel touches it, you might fall over, you might turn over. So this is the crucial point where the race is won or lost.
But the excavation not only reveals architectural details. There are also objects in the debris which tell of everyday life back then. Just like today, you could buy merchandise and souvenirs in the ancient stadiums.
People would maybe, with this dice, play some games in between the races. So this artifact comes from our excavation in the part of the spectators' ranks of the cavea, and it's interesting because it seems to be part of a vessel. It's probably the upper part, and it looks like a little rider. That's why we find it very fitting for the circus.
Charioteers became huge celebrities, and people would want memorabilia about them. They would buy little lamps that might have images of them or of their horses on them. So it's a real big business.
The Roman circus is far more than a spectacular venue for chariot racing. It's also a considerable economic factor for Imperial Rome. The largest shopping mall of the ancient world extends over more than 3/4 of a mile and is open to the public even when there are no races on. So throughout the year, the circus is a center of attraction for Rome's population.
There's a whole infrastructure around the race and the racetrack. You had shops, you had entertainment, you could bet on the races, you could buy cushions, you could buy drinks, you could buy food, you could buy clothes, you could buy everything actually, including prostitutes.
During the day, the Circus Maximus provides a magnificent facade for the games. But at night, it turns into a dangerous place. In the countless taverns, shady figures and gamblers hang about. Prostitutes accost customers. It's a red light district where many a provincial visitor gets fleeced. Sex for money is an established feature of Roman society. Prices are low and attract many customers. The emperor even feels obliged to impose a minimum age for streetwalkers. Though not officially ostracized, high society looks down on them, as they do on the charioteers. In contrast to prostitution, gambling is prohibited in ancient Rome. Various emperors have introduced dicing laws to curtail the ruinous consequences of gambling. Alas, without success. In the dim taverns around the circus, a gambler will always find company. But Scorpus has greater aims.
Even for charioteers who made it to Rome, only a select few would have actually been able to race in the Circus Maximus, as it was the ultimate venue.
Go! Go!
Those who want to go up in the world have to stand out from the crowd.
Come on! Maxi! Go! Go!
Since agents throughout the empire sent hundreds of young talents to Rome.
Go! Come on!
In the training camps of the various stables, they must prove themselves.
Throw him out!
And beat their competitors.
He's useless! He's a dud! Throw him out!
It was a highly competitive environment, and the profession of chariot racing was highly physically demanding.
Domitian's enthusiasm for chariot racing is legendary. The emperor does not miss a chance to look for new talent. In the eyes of the Romans, nothing could throw more splendor on their ruler than the fame of a successful charioteer, whose career the emperor himself has promoted.
Choose young Scorpus.
I choose him. Don't smile at me, slave. You could end up dead on the track.
Death smiles to us all. All I can do is smile back.
Yeah. Oh. Well.
From now on, the career of Scorpus is linked to one of the great stables. The Romans call them factiones, the factions of the circus. They are among the most influential enterprises of the Roman world.
The factions were the four big stables who controlled chariot racing. So they sourced the horses, they paid for the chariots, they actually found and trained the charioteers, and they put it all together in the show itself.
The four stables are named by their colours: the blues, the greens, the reds, and the whites. The colours have a symbolic meaning. They stand not only for the four seasons, but also for various gods as their patron saints. The respective colours will also be worn by the charioteers, and of course, by their fans during the races. By and by, the circus factions have gained so much economic power that they have become a political factor, reaching well beyond the entertainment business. Like today's Formula One, the ancient stables need all sorts of highly specialized personnel.
You have the whole faction stable, which is just an incredible industry hierarchy, sort of beehive of workers. You have the stable managers who are in charge of the whole operation. You have their assistants, you have the trainers, you have grooms working with the horses, you have veterinarians and doctors, you have the chariot makers, the harness makers, the blacksmiths. And then you have the senior charioteers and the junior charioteers and the apprentices all working together.
The factions were big business. They're effectively a kind of contractor that the emperor would pay to put on the show on his behalf. So there's a lot of money involved in paying for the charioteers, in paying for the horses, in feeding them, in all the training that has to go on. So it's a real, almost industrial size exercise.
And so these factions then gain so much power that they dictate the prices they charge, right? They dictate what it costs to rent their horses, to rent their drivers, to have them for a day on the track. And the officials, the magistrates who were running these games, they had to kowtow to these factions to get what they needed.
And as in today's racing milieu, marketing experts, agents and impresarios are gallivanting about, all and always on the take. As the racing season draws closer, the influence of the stables grows. since the promoters are under increasing pressure to stage a memorable show. And the prime promoter, in the eyes of the people, is the emperor.
Factions knew they could charge what they wanted. And so there is this one story that there was a senior official who wanted to put on horse races, and the factions were just asking an exorbitant amount of money, so much he's like, I can't pay that, that is ridiculous, so he threatened to run dogs.
But money isn't really the problem when it comes to staging the games.
Your business?
We must speak to the Emperor.
Why?
It's about the race.
The stable's bosses know exactly which card to play.
Well, we need more money.
Scum! We have given you more than enough.
Well, the thing is, what we've got is just enough to run dogs, not horses.
You must be out of your minds. The crowd will go mad.
That's the reason we are here.
The threat works. On no account can the emperor afford to cancel the chariot races merely to save costs. It will be an unprecedented loss of face for the ruler. The representatives of the circus factions are quite aware of this, and so they brazenly put the squeeze on him.
So take this and get out. Heed my advice. Dare this again, and I'll make you pay. Out.
Scorpus is fortunate to have ended up with the Greens, the most successful stable of its time. A veritable entertainment machine, and its managers are familiar with all the tricks of the trade. And of course, they know how to stage the most spectacular four-horse races. A four in hand calls for highly specialized drivers and horses, and there is an astonishing detail.
Romans certainly had two-horse chariot races, but they were junior league. The real Grand Prix was the four-horse race. This is still the engine. They're being pulled by the yoke because the outside horses are only being attached at the head. They are not pulling the chariot at all. You've just got on either side a loose horse attached at the head.
So the charioteer has little control over the two outside horses. Nevertheless, he must make the beasts run in parallel.
So many bits of leather. Not a challenge, but okay. Walk on, lads. Off you go. Go on. Walk on.
The Romans adored and admired the racehorses almost as much as their drivers. A Christian author once complained that while the Romans could recite the names of their best racehorses, when asked about the number of the apostles of Christ, they wouldn't know the answer. For Michael Oates, the Romans' passion for horses is most understandable.
This is a completely different sensation. There's a different energy in the horses. You can feel that different energy. This is how they would be in the wild, in a herd, in a stampede. Fanned out like this, not politely one behind the other. And you really feel that, and it makes a difference to how you can control them, let alone the fact that those outside horses, there is no attachment to the chariot at all. So trying to keep them all straight is really challenging, especially on the bends. There's so many bits of leather. You need to keep this one short so he's turning around like that, and let this one out so he's going around the outside, and make sure you're not ignoring the middle two who are the engine and doing all the pulling. So many things. It's really, really challenging. The question remains, why 4 horses? It's not as fast as 2, it's certainly no faster than 2. It's harder to drive, so why did they do 4? Well, I think that it's about theatre, it's about spectacle. The Circus Maximus was a theatre. It was sporting entertainment. And it delivered spectacle in 3 ways: majesty, supremacy, and jeopardy.
For Scorpus, the day of his first race has arrived. The whole of Rome dresses up for the games. In the palaces and villas of the mighty and the rich, in the tenement houses and alleys, there is only one topic on a day like this. Who is going to win? One of the famous names, or maybe a newcomer who nobody yet knows?
Go to Rome and win a race for me. Do it for me, Scorpus, my boy. Take this along.
Domitian too carefully prepares for his appearance in the circus. For the general population, the races are the only opportunity to set eyes on their emperor.
The emperors have to be careful. Emperors who are supposed to be too chummy with charioteers or other performers were looked down upon by the elite. On the other hand, there clearly is an element of reflected glory, so giving favours to charioteers could also win you favour with the people, but you don't want to look too friendly, and also you've got to look in several directions. You want to have the people on your side, but you've also got to keep the elite on your side as well.
And people in Rome had not a good life. They were poor, also the free people. And when they could go to the circus, that was for them the escape from their narrow existence.
It's quite likely that family members could go together in a way they perhaps couldn't to the other spectacle races. So fathers and sons could have sat together, pointing out all the finer features of the races.
On the day of the races, about 150,000 Romans watched the procession of the Pompa move up to the circus. Some estimates even suggest the number of spectators may have been as many as 250,000. Certainly, no modern-day stadium could accommodate such a crowd. Prior to the event, a religious ceremony is held.
In addition to the religious gods, there were the gods of the circus themselves, that is, the charioteers.
Scorpus finally sees his dream come true, but will he fulfill the expectations of his stable, his sponsor? And not least, the emperor himself. But before the races are on, another event is keeping the visitors in suspense: the lottery. Sometimes it's only fruits and foodstuffs which are thrown into the audience. More popular by far are the lottery balls, with the prospect of fabulous prizes.
The lottery took the form of small wooden balls which were thrown into the crowd, and when an audience member caught them, he or she would open them up to find a prize inscribed inside.
This might just be a few birds or a small pot of money, or it might be a whole house or even an estate in the countryside. And you can imagine the frantic scrambling that would have gone on to get hold of these things, and probably the huge number of injuries that would happen in the crush.
But not all recipients find their prizes useful and beg the emperor for an exchange.
Have mercy on me, O Caesar. A ship? To go to war with? What for shall I use it?
Alas, he may not be in the mood.
What should I do with it?
Tension mounts. In a few seconds, the charioteers would charge onto the track of the Circus Maximus. Amidst a frantic roar of cheers from a crowd of more than 100,000 spectators.
Chariot racing could be seen by far more spectators than could get into the Colosseum, and it happened far more often, perhaps as almost once a week. So they're popular across society and their influence spreads out across the Roman world.
In the ruins of Carthage, once the site of the second largest circus of the empire, archaeologists have found spectacular images highlighting the aura that once surrounded the charioteers.
This is a fascinating mosaic because it's composed of these squares that depict circus horses. We don't know who the mosaic was made for, whether it was made for a charioteer who, was wealthy and decided to have this made to commemorate his career, whether it was a patron of the circus, so someone who provided funds or horses for the circus, or whether it was just a massive fan of the circus. They just loved it. It's the equivalent of putting up posters of your favorite sports stars or sports jerseys to recollect, like this is your hobby, this is your passion. It may not be your living, but it's what you do in your spare time. And so this is another fascinating insight into the role that the circus played in everyday life in the Roman world.
Throughout the Roman world, archaeologists have come across relics of a civilization permeated by the spirit of the races. They not only determined everyday life, but even gained an importance in the world beyond. A sarcophagus adorned with cupids, messengers of the god of love who is often portrayed as a child. What's special about this one? The cupids are charioteers. The scene is a virtual snapshot of a race. One detail, also known from mosaics, is of particular interest. The signals by which the number of rounds is displayed. The dolphins. Immediately prior to the race, so-called sponsores dappled the stadium ground with water to reduce the dust that would be stirred up by the horses. All eyes are now set on the starting gates.
You had starting gates for the reds, the blues, the whites and the greens. Mostly 2 or 3 of one stable against others. So 4, 8 or 12 charioteers.
It's the moment Scorpus has been looking forward to for years. The race will last only a few minutes, but it will decide his future. Like most Romans, the charioteers too are highly superstitious and carry charms to summon up miraculous powers. But once the emperor has started the race, courage and skill are all that counts. For 350 meters, the chariots speed along the spina, the partition wall separating the track into two halves. After a 180-degree bend, the chariots race back in the opposite direction.
It wasn't all about speed, it was a question of tactics. If you could take the inner line, then your horses had to race a much shorter distance. Above all, it was about turning the turning posts really tightly, because it was easy to lose control of the four horses and for them to take a really wide berth.
On average, the chariots run with a speed of about 25 miles per hour. It's all over after 8 to 9 minutes. On the other hand, in this way, up to 22 thrilling events can be offered to the spectators in a single day.
To do 7 laps of the Circus Maximus is about 3.5 miles. Now that means it can't be a sprint. If you try to just charge away for that far, your horses would soon run out of energy. So it means that the race was all about pacing yourself, controlling your horses, avoiding the pitfalls, and then timing your run.
Fair play is definitely not the order of the day. The drivers will zigzag, force their opponents out of the way, or try to outbrake them. It's a no-holds-barred affair.
The races would have been hugely competitive, very violent, lots of jostling for position, and the charioteers would often cheat. All of which was trying to make the opponents lose control of their horses and of getting themselves into a better tactical position.
The turning points of the spine, called meti, are marked by mighty pillars. The rounds are counted by lowering signals, which are designed like dolphins. They are a bow to Neptune, the water god, since he is not only lord of the fishes, but of the horses too. There's hardly a race where all charioteers will pass the finishing line.
Charioteers had to be hugely strong. What they would do to control the horses is actually wrap the reins around their torso, and then they would use the weight of their body to actually force the horses to turn round the tight turning posts. But it also meant it was very dangerous, that if there was any kind of crash, then they would be pulled out of the vehicle and they would still be tied to these loose horses by the rein.
It's mostly at the turning points that collisions occur. Chariots somersault through the air, horses fall. Drivers are trampled over or dragged to their death. Consideration is not a virtue you expect from a charioteer. Scorpus drives home his first victory.
This time you won, slave. Next time, you will end up dead on the track.
Death is the only freedom a slave knows.
Victory in the Circus Maximus for a charioteer could be a life-changing event. It could bring him wealth, fame, and adoring fans.
But as always, fame also evokes envy. A frustrated marshal notes, "How long have I to hang about this bunch of fearful servants and minions for a few hundred shabby coins, while Scorpus, in one single hour, carries away 15 bags filled to the brim with gold?"
Most Romans would have lived off 1,000 sesterces or less per year, and that would have had to feed a family of 4 and clothe them and buy oil and wine and other things they wanted. So for a charioteer to win 15,000 sesterces was a huge sum of money by an average man's standards.
It's the beginning of a fabulous career, which over the years sees Scorpus join the ranks of the Miliarii, charioteers with more than 1,000 victories. He will become the most successful driver of the Flavian era and a celebrated idol.
Scorpus won 2,048 races in his 10-year career. Now, he must have been racing then in 5,000 or 6,000 races, which meant he was probably racing 500 or 600 times a year, 10 times a week. He's out there risking his life on a very regular basis, but it also means that because he's successful, he's winning a lot of money, and he would start thinking of trying to buy his freedom.
Now you are a free man.
As is customary in Rome, Scorpus is released from slavery in a legislative act in the presence of his former owner.
Why, you might think, would his owner let him buy his freedom? Well, because they wanted to keep the charioteer incentivized. They wanted to keep him winning races for their stable. So they would allow him to buy his freedom, and he would then probably have got a bigger cut of the prize money. But in all of this, both sides were still benefiting. The stables were still winning races, still winning prize money, and so was Scorpus.
The release of slaves was quite a common occurrence in Rome. Ancient tombs bear witness to this practice. They also prove that the freedmen stood a good chance of rising within Roman society.
Here we are at the tomb of P. Quinctius T.L. Liber. In other words, the tomb of Publius Quinctius, the freedman of Titus, who was a bookseller. The L after his name tells us that he was a libertus, that is, a freed slave. He was able to overcome the shackles of slavery and eventually become a successful professional, buying his freedom. And so we see in the cases of freedmen, like Publius Quinctius, the opportunities that they had to achieve higher social mobility and even wealth and independence. This is like the story of Scorpus in the sense that he would have risen up from the shackles of slavery, but he achieved a level of wealth and greatness and fame that this bookseller could have never even imagined.
Yet the finer people still look down on charioteers.
Charioteers themselves are in this sort of ambivalent position in Roman society. Like all performers, they're officially classed as infames, we would say infamous. They don't get the protection of the Roman state. They're not citizens. And so even if they were very successful, very famous, were being feted by the populace, maybe invited to dinner parties, they wouldn't have been accepted as one of us by the social elite.
And just like today, there were the hooligans. But back then, they didn't merely resort to violence. They would also call up supernatural powers.
The Romans saw religion everywhere, and they were, by our standards, very superstitious. They used magic a lot to try and influence the outcomes of events. And so it made perfect sense for them to do that on the chariot racing as well.
It's quite common to buy a curse directed at the driver, as well as at the horses of an opposing team. Officially, the practice may be banned, but in the crooked alleys of the poorer quarters, there's no problem getting what you want.
Scorpus must die.
You just need to find a sorcerer who will record the curse on a little leaden plate and then cast his magical powers upon it.
One of the most intriguing aspects of the social and cultural life of the circus is the issue of the curse tablets, which have been found in association with several of the circuses across the Roman Empire.
In today's Israel, in the circus of Herod near Caesarea, archaeologists found about 60 of these curse panels in a well. At first sight, the plates, the size of a banknote, seem to be blank. But this appearance is deceptive. State-of-the-art photography brings their secrets to light. A succession of exposures at different angles reveals what is written on them. Bind them and blind them and throw them into the dust. Distract their run and make them fail the bend.
The way it works in the circus games is that you could pay someone to put a curse on the rival team. You would often do this in a great deal of detail. One of the curse tablets found not only names the charioteers in the rival team, but also names their mothers. In order to make the curse tablets work, there are various ways you want it to be more effective. Being buried underground in association with kind of the underground powers. They've also been found at particularly significant places in the circus itself. The turning posts, for example, and the starting gates, because they're the places where accidents are most likely to happen. They've also been found near cemeteries. Again, in association with the sort of underworld close to circuses. So you want to bury them in a place where they have the best chance of achieving what you want.
And there's yet another discovery. In one of the rolled up plates, the scientists found sage, which obviously had been wrapped in with a purpose. The Greek word for sage is sphakos. Phonetically, it's similar to the word sphakilos, which means trembling or wriggling, and as in sphakalismos, describes a disease. The phonetic similarity between the herb and the disease is supposed to enhance the effectiveness of the curse. Which explains the sage in the plate.
Scorpus, Svakos, Svakilipus, Svakos, Svakilipus.
The fanatical followers of the respective circus factions will stop at nothing to intimidate or unnerve the opposing teams.
Scorpus, may your horses drop dead in the dust of the circus. And may you die with them. This curse be upon you. Death to you!
And time and again, in the nights before the races, hooligans flock together to mob the stables of their opponents. Violent confrontations between the fans in and outside the circus are a common occurrence. At times, there are even fatalities, as recorded by ancient historians.
Quiet, quiet, quiet. Quiet.
The emperors may try to keep the violence under control, but to enforce a ban on fan clubs is unthinkable.
Don't worry, everything's gonna be all right.
Every charioteer knows that someday he will meet his fate. At 27, Scorpus has logged more than 2,000 victories. But this time, he's no longer in the protective hands of the gods. The greatest idol of his time dies in the sand of the racecourse. Martial lets Scorpus deliver his own obituary. O Rome, I am Scorpus, the splendor of your clamorous circus, your early deceased darling. The envious goddess of destiny who cut my thread of life probably believed, when she counted my victories, I were an old man. One year after Scorpus, Domitian, his patron and admirer, also dies. The last emperor of the Flavian dynasty falls victim to an assassination.
In contrast to a charioteer like Scorpus, who rose up from slavery and achieved immortality, the Emperor Domitian was consigned to the dustbin of history.
The legacy of a fascinating era lives on, in stadiums and on racetracks throughout the world.